Hi, I'm Amanda Skyer, Executive Director of the Preservation Foundation of Palm Beach, and I'm welcoming you to one of our first lectures this season, and we are delighted to have with us Raymond Jungles, who is a landscape architect based out of Miami. So thank you for joining us today.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Appreciation for the ability of native plants to restore our environment and create more resilient communities is becoming more widespread, but that wasn't always the case. When you were in school studying landscape architecture, what were you taught about native plants, and how does that compare to what you teach when you give lectures at universities like Harvard and Kent State today?
So one of the textbooks we had was a book from Ian McHarg called Design with Nature. And whereas it didn't get specifically into particular plants, it was all about ecosystems and working with, the land to use the drainage, the proper drainage, the solar orientation, and to use plants and to use design methods that really reinforced what was already there. And that's basically my whole philosophy is, before there was any disturbance of the natural areas, before human intervention, there were all these great plants that were put there and have been there and developed over the millennial to sustain themselves with the climate that we have. Here we have 60 inches of rain a year, minimum. We have 80 inches this year, and we have salt. We have poor soils. We have, all these different things that have led to colonies of plants and associations of plants that do well in those particular zones. And so wherever I'm working, whether it's on the coast or on highland or lowland or whatever, I study the plants that would normally be there. And it's a natural, because basically I'm sort of a hands-off gardener. I like to plant things that don't need to have a lot of fussing. I don't want to have to fertilize them all the time. I don't want to have to spray them with chemicals. I don't want to have to irrigate them excessively. Pretty much most of my gardens, at least in areas where water is an issue, are only irrigated until they get established, and then the irrigation is taken off of them. I don't like the idea of plants that are on a life support system, plants that couldn't live on their own if there was a drought, because I remember when I first started really using native plants a lot was when I was doing work in the Florida Keys in the early 80s, because water was very expensive and people didn't have the cisterns. So I started studying, and I met people who told me about the benefits of native Florida Keys plants. And I really got interested in that. And it was so I've been practicing that now for over 40 years. And initially it was difficult to find native plants. There was only a couple different nurseries. But I found the people who knew the most about them, and I learned from them. And I also learned just a lot by watching plants. I mean, the important thing is to use the plant in the right place and use a plant that's going to reach its ultimate growth characteristics and be happy where you put it. It has to do with elevation above sea level, solar orientation, the types of soils, whether it's an understory, if it gets heat relief from other plants, and so on and so forth. But what's really interesting is to create a garden that has a wide range of different light, so it's not all a shade garden. There's edges of the woods kind of a feeling where you get a lot more of the insects and the butterflies and things. Flowers need sun. And to get a lot of the pollinators, you need flowers. And then if you get pollinators, then you get the birds that eat the pollinators, and so on and so forth. So I like gardens that are alive. I like gardens that entertain me. It's free entertainment if you plant the right things.
I love that. So here at the Preservation Foundation, we strive to create opportunities for people to learn about the benefits of native plants through our work in Pan's Garden, which is actually Florida's first all-native botanical garden. If there was something that you wish everyone knew about native plants, what is that message that you would like to get to them, and what's the best way of getting it across?
Well, I think it's all about creating a sustainable garden, a sustainable landscape. So the native plants are just part of the picture. Then they bring the native birds and they bring the native insects, and it's all part of a cycle. So when humans come into an area and they develop it, and they take, much more than half, 70, 80, 90% of the existing native vegetation away, and they come back and they plant plants that aren't from the region, that really don't have any attraction to the local, they don't provide habitat for the local flora and fauna, then you usually end up with a sterile garden that's a collection of plants. This garden is spectacular. I mean, I love doing all native gardens. I don't always do it, but all my gardens always have a strong foundation, 75% minimum of native plants. There's a lot of botanical diversity because you can use a lot of plants in a native garden and they all work well together. You know, and then like I like to create the edge of the woods look on most properties where people would use a hedge, because I like to create a blurring of the boundaries of who owns what land. And if you plant it in the proper way, it'll look like you just cleared 40% of your land and you own another 60% that you haven't cleared. And that's sort of my mission. Like if you see A Life on Our Planet by David Attenborough, which is an incredible documentary about he's 90, and it's about, he's been studying nature his entire life, and it's about what he's seen in his life and what's been lost. I was in 6th grade back in the late 60s, and there was a great social consciousness back then about, you know, humans' impact on the earth, about overpopulation, about just about, you know, the destruction of the environment and everything, and about the need for a more ecological approach to preserving the planet. And that really impacted me a lot. And at the time, I didn't know I was going to be in the design profession. I was just basically a lover of nature. And fortunately, I found a way to basically pay homage to nature almost every day, because what I do is bring nature back into the city or into areas where it's been lost, and that gives me great pleasure.
Well, and that's a great lead into my next question, which is about the project we recently commissioned you to do, which is a phased master plan for Phipps Ocean Park, which is an 18-acre park in the town of Palm Beach. Could you talk about some of the unique qualities of the park and what you hope to achieve there?
Well, I'm very excited about that. We do a lot of coastal projects. A lot of the most valuable real estate, of course, is on the coast, you know, whether it be a lake, an intercoastal waterway, or the ocean. But what's so great about this site is the elevation you have. You've got this primary dune with an elevation of, it must be over 20 feet above sea level. But then everything behind the primary dune and the coastal, the beach front, has been developed into lawn, into basically a few trees. A few nice native trees are still left, remnants of the old forest that was there. So I see an opportunity to bring back and bring some of the magic that you have here into that property, and to create a place where people can just really come and with their friends and their family and walk for exercise or just to study nature. And I mean, imagine 18 acres. This place is what, half an acre?
Yes.
Wow, what an opportunity, because here we could be propagating things from here for there, but I love the way Susan's brought all these fantastic esoteric flowering, you know, beautiful little wildflowers and ground covers and things into this magical place. And I'm really pleased to be working in Palm Beach. I would love to see Palm Beach really embrace the use of natives and to bring a lot of the birds and the insects that were here in the past back into the garden of Palm Beach, because it has the scale of a garden. And I think people will really appreciate it when they start to hear more of the songbirds and see more of the beautiful creatures that nature has given us.
I definitely agree, and there's certainly an awakening amongst town residents about this issue and its importance. Recently, the town adopted a new ordinance that requires all new landscapes to be 25% native. And the Preservation Foundation has taken that one step further by asking you to design a 100% native landscape at Phipps Ocean Park. What are some of the challenges and opportunities in that design directive?
Well, you know, I think that you're going to save money on irrigation. I think that you're going to, there's plenty of plants available right now, and if we need some of the more, less common plants, we can get them propagated in time for this project. But back in the early 80s, it was hard to find any native plants in any kind of quantities. But Monroe County started a long time ago requiring, I think it must be at least 50%. I think everybody should shoot for at least 50% native. You know, the trees should be 50%, the shrubs should be 50%, et cetera, et cetera. And with that, you get more biodiversity and you create more habitat.
Well, I think this has been a wonderful introduction to the talk you're about to give for us, where you're going to introduce some of the projects that you've worked on over the years. So we're looking forward to that. And I want to thank everyone for tuning in. And we hope you'll enjoy Raymond's lecture, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
So I was looking forward to seeing you all last March. But I have to say this is even better, right? Outside, surrounded by native plants. So I'm going to kick this off. I've been in Coconut Grove since 1981 when I graduated from the University of Florida. And I've never really worked in a landscape architect's office. I started my own firm because I wanted to go down to Brazil and be mentored by Roberto Burle Marx, which is one of the smartest things I ever did. But I love Florida. I moved down to Florida when I was 18 in 1974, so do the math. What I'm showing you right now are just some images of Florida landscape. Because a lot of people say Florida landscape's boring, right? I think it's one of the most dramatic landscapes that there is. And talk about beauty, look at our sky that we have down here. We don't have mountains, but we have the best clouds in the world. So I had my office on the river downtown Miami from 2002 till about I guess it's been about 5 years ago. And it was right on the river. I did a little native landscape there. If you're going down through downtown Miami on a boat, you'll see a little piece that looks like the Everglades. That's where my office was. But after 14 years, they sold the land to a developer for 4 skyscrapers, and which never got built because the economic turndown. So I decided to buy a building instead of renting. So I bought this little building in Coconut Grove. These are some of the original renderings we did to show what our intent was. The land isn't that big, but there's a lot of public land around the property. So I sought permission from Dade County as well as the city of Miami, and I was able to landscape all the public right-of-way. So I ended up doing a whole city block. And you know, if I'm going to convince people to use native plants, which is one of my passions, I felt like I needed to do a demonstration, you know, other than the gardens I do for my clients. Sorry about that. I'm not sure why that's happening. But you can see the downtown skyline in the background there. So from my roof, where I'll eventually do a really nice roof garden, it's got one of the best views in Miami over the tree canopy in North Grove. There were a few big trees that were there. The building was designed and built by Lester Pancoast, the son of Russell Pancoast, who is a very famous architect in Miami Beach, as you preservationists probably know. And he had planted a few cool trees off of the property, and it was sort of my inspiration to just expand my territory. So you can see the before pictures and the after pictures. This huge oak tree that was on the corner was really what sold me on the property. But we had to gut the whole thing, build, you know, first we had to buy it from 3 different owners, and there were like 3 or 4 different businesses on each floor. It took a while to get permits, but, and now no one's working there. I have 3 people in the office, but I go there all the time. It's fun, and I imagine that we'll be back in there in full force soon. We're all staying really busy working on computers in different places. People are actually loving working at home now. But you can see it's a lot of native plants, a lot of native palms. I do the only pruning that gets done there, and I only have to do it, well, Ben helps me. I only have to do it 3-4 times a year. And the intention is for it to look wild and natural. So when things look wild and natural, if something's out of place, it's not jarring, right? You can live with it. If you're hiking on a trail in the woods, you're enjoying whatever's there, right? You don't care if there's a tree that's down or if there's some leaves on the ground. So, the thing that's happened though is that we took this sterile sidewalk, and we actually built the sidewalks around our building. This one was existing on 27th Avenue. And we landscaped it to the point where now it's become sort of a de facto park in the neighborhood, and everybody walks their kids in strollers and their dogs. In fact, we've even put dog stations out there, and we take care of that. And it's a great pleasure, and people come there and they study the planting, and I love it. I'll just be walking around and people I see them looking at a plant, and do you want to know the name? And if my clients want to come over, or students want to come over and learn plants, I've got just about every plant there, although Susan's got me one up here with a few of these great wildflowers she has. There's 13 parking spaces, but we really only allow 6 people to park there, so it's really more of a pedestrian environment. We don't want to feel like it's, a madhouse full of cars. And there's great places for the employees to eat outside. And as I said, eventually there'll be a great roof deck. And we built this structure for instead of having a dumpster, we have trash cans in there, and we have the pump for the water wall. The water wall creates a really nice sound so that you don't hear the road, which is only 20 feet away. The other tree that really caught my attention is this kapok tree that was there that must have been there before Lester planted, because he did the building in the early 80s. That tree is older than that, and it's a magnificent tree. And we're in the canopy. Coconut Grove has probably the best canopy of anywhere in Florida that I know of. A lot of big trees. Fairchild's been doing plant distribution forever. David Fairchild used to live in the Grove. He gave plants that he collected from around the world to his friends, and they sort of started sprouting up everywhere in the Grove. And there's still a lot of great native trees there too. But one of my missions is to try to convince people to take out some of the bauinias and take out the tropical almonds and take out some of the things that just take over the landscape and plant natives. So I do what I call subversive landscape design, whereas I plant things that should be there so that there's a seed source, so that I create habitat for the local flora and fauna, so that then the birds eat the seeds or the squirrels eat the seeds and they distribute it in the rest of the neighborhood, which has been what's been going on in Coconut Grove since 1900, but it hasn't been the right plants that have been spreading around. And then the beautiful thing is we all work in basically a virtual tree house. So we see the birds outside our windows, we see the squirrels outside our windows. We lit it up at night so that the block is safe. There used to be, there would be vagrants living underneath the building because the building was sort of like a bridge, right? We had to put a fence around it. But it's amazing that there's no vandalism. Every now and then there's a little bit of graffiti, but we paint over it within a day or so it doesn't encourage it to proliferate. On a larger scale, on Lincoln Road, which was Morris Lapidus's westernmost block that he had done, and it was a historic block, but somewhere back in the 70s, I think, they opened the road to traffic just in the western end, and they allowed them to build much larger scale buildings than you see on the rest of Lincoln Road. And the developer, Robert Wennett, had this idea of developing the block and creating a place there that people would come to, and with retail being the driver. So on the whole north side of the block, these are some of our earlier drawings. On the whole north side of the block, there was a bank building that had no activity on the street level and a surface parking lot. And then there was this, as you can see on the lower left, a street you had to cross, and a planter with a planter in the median, so it was impossible to get around from one side of the block to the other. And when I was doing the research for the project, I saw an article about Carl Fisher was marketing Miami Beach real estate, and he brought an elephant from India in, and they were ripping mangroves out by the roots. And he was, come on down, we're going to make you an island and build your house here, which is great. We needed development there. But my idea was to bring native plants back. So pretty much we planted all natives in the block, mostly plants from the Everglades. And we created a series of water gardens. There's 4 of them that use one biofiltration system for all 4. And it's become it's become the most, I think, exciting block on Lincoln Road, is because you can walk from one side of the block to the other. And having studied Lawrence Halperin's work, I love the way he left spaces for people to be able to choreograph their own use of the space. So that was big in my mind. And I was working with Herzog and Demeron at the very beginning at the master planning of this, until the city said yes, they gave them the green light that they would let us do this project. And then Robert, of course, built it for the city as a joint venture, but the city paid for it. It was $6.8 million in total, and that included a lot of below grade work that was done. So it was a year or so before you even saw anything coming out of the ground. And then, of course, the influence of Roberto Burle Marx and his beautiful pavement patterns and everything in Brazil were sort of a natural, and Herzog and Demeron really loved the pavement material Pedra Portuguesa from Brazil, and that's what we ended up using. One of the things I love about this space is that, you know, pre-COVID, of course, people would bring their kids and just let them run around there, and I would just love to, there's great little places to eat out on the sidewalk there, and just love to watch the kids and the freedom they were having. Their parents were having a glass of wine, and they were jumping all over and climbing on top of the things where they shouldn't even climb, but they were having a great time being kids. And people have brought fish and put them in there, and there's turtles, and then of course the native birds, there's this green heron that's always there fishing. That's one of my favorite things. But like in this image, you see a bald cypress, you see saw palmetto, and you see one of my favorite ground covers, the golden creeper, which grows on the beach. But we've discovered that it grows really well in planters and on structures as well, and it's a great cascading plant. And spatterdock and pond apple, red mangroves, which is not a wetlands plant, but will grow well in wetlands. And it really gives us that sort of wild feeling we're after in the park. And because the client created a deed restriction so that nobody in the future could take over the center of the block and for commercial purposes, it becomes a place for yoga and impromptu community events. And the wildlife love it. And one of my favorite plants is the swamp lily, Crinum americanum. If you ever drive across the Everglades, sometimes you'll see it when it's in full bloom. Other than that, you really don't see it much. But it's thriving there in the city. Leon Levy Native Plant Preserve is a project in Eleuthera that we did for the Leon Levy Foundation. And I was actually recommended for that from Sheila Brady, who works with Omivan Sweden. And she does a lot of work for Leon Levy Foundation. But she didn't know anything about the Bahamian plants. And we do an awful lot of work in the Bahamas, and a lot of work, used to do a lot more work in the Florida Keys. And the plant communities and the species are pretty much the same. Or there's maybe more diversity in the islands, but the same plants. So the knowledge we had, then working with Ethan Freed, who's a botanist who also works for the Leon Levy Foundation, we did an all-native plant garden there that's become, according to TripAdvisor, the #1 destination in Eleuthera. How many people have been to Eleuthera? It's a great place. Not a lot to do there, but now there's something you can do. So it's not that large of an area. I think it's 15 acres. And most of it's a native coppice that's never been disturbed, but the areas that had been disturbed are the areas that were good for farming and the flatter areas. So we created a whole circulation system. This is the entrance off of the road. We planted everything that you see here, and we even helped design the visitor center. And we designed the visitor center so that you didn't really see the building. It was really just a portal into the garden, and everybody passes through here. The little gift shop and where the staff works is in there. And when you look through there, you'll see the only native plants that are in the garden, I mean non-native plants, which are the coconut palms, because this site was a dump. And this area where you see the water, that was all fill, and it was all a dump, and there was a mound and piles of things, and everybody used to throw their coconuts in there, and on the higher ground, the coconuts rooted. So the first thing we did was we removed all the debris, and we dug down to the bedrock there, because this water table that you see here that we've exposed, much like the water table is exposed over here in the wetlands, connects to the groundwater, and it's only about a half a mile from the coast, so it's brackish. It's not fresh water. But there's a lot of landlocked red mangroves sort of off to the left of this picture, and as you come through the guardhouse, the visitor center, you come around the right and past the waterfall. All the rock was excavated on site, and then you hook up with the boardwalk, and that takes you around the rest of the property. And then there's outdoor classroom areas, like multi-purpose spaces that are just, in case it's rain. People do get married here, and they have community events. The boardwalk we were telling you about, but we had to kind of wade through the areas to determine where the best place to put the boardwalks would be. And then the last part that we did the project in 3 phases, was for wetlands plants. And it was an old cistern that was there for watering the crops that were being raised down in the richer soil in the flat areas. And the whole idea was to create a freshwater wetlands, because the other wetlands is brackish, so that we could create more habitat for the local birds and have some Bahamian fish and turtles and everything as part of the outdoor classroom. And you can see what was just a rectangle of concrete we were able to make into a sort of a magical little place where it's sort of tucked in the middle of the coppice, and it's a favorite place for the white-crowned pigeon, which is it's a very timid bird, because people used to hunt them and probably still do hunt them in the Bahamas. They're a lot bigger than our mourning doves. When they fly, they almost look like they're going to fall. And if you sit here and you're really quiet, you'll see a few of them. And I had designed once a bird blind here, because I really wanted to be able to have a place where someone could sit and the birds wouldn't even know you were there, but that was one thing that didn't make it. But we created these beautiful bird perch trees by cutting down Australian pines, which is, of course, the invasive exotic, which is the scourge of the Bahamas, by the way, that and scaevola. If they don't do something soon to get control of those 2 plants, the only place you're going to see native Bahamian vegetation is in the Leon Levy Plant Preserve. Working with the local people, there were some great people who knew how to handle the rock and build the water features. And of course, working with Ethan and Shelby White was a great pleasure. One of the things we did was we created a lath house for plant propagation. And they raised the rare endemic plants there, and they let them out into the landscape, let them out into the Bahamian world, if you will. And we're going to be using a lot of the plants grown from here for our Bahamian projects that aren't available in the United States. And in one area, there's as part of the education, there's a zone where they used to do the farming, where the richer soil, as you see, it has this red color, where we have basically all the plants that the Arawak Indians used to live off of there. The Africans, when they came there as slaves, their food stuff, and the local Bahamians. So like everything that can grow there without irrigation is growing in this one particular area. And then as you reach the highest point on the property, there's a great bird watching location. So I highly recommend, if you get a chance to go there, to check it out. Something a little bit closer to home is the FINA district in Miami Beach. We worked with multiple design firms, Foster Partners, Catherine Martin, OMA, and a few others to create this project. We're the only landscape architects to do all these projects. So what it was is it's an art district. You can see, I actually used to be a lifeguard in the city of Miami Beach when I was 19, and this beach wasn't there. The water used to go all the way up to the seawalls that were right next to the building. But back in the 70s and late 70s and early 80s, they did the dredging and they built the whole beach. And then they built the dune. And there was a beautiful boardwalk there. So what we did was we reinforced the dune with other plants that should have been there. Of course, the sable palms are a great dune plant. To try to create a sense of human scale and shade on the boardwalk. But here you see on the right is Fina House, which is a luxury condominium project. The penthouse sold for $60 million. And on the left is the Fina Hotel. It used to be the Saxony Hotel. And what our whole idea was let's take the dune plants and just bring them through the whole site back to A1A, and then let's cross A1A with them in the Arts District, because those are the plants that are going to do well without a lot of messing around, and the native plants could actually help unify the whole area. And it's very distinctive when you're driving up and down A1A. When you get to that place, you notice something's different. There's big sea grape trees. There's tall crooked sable palms that look like they could have always been there. And across the street is the Arts District. And this is actually the first garage that's all mechanized. It's valet only, and the parking garage actually goes under this whole block, and they stack cars in there. And that building's from OMA. And the site plan for the Fina Hotel, you know, a lot of the projects that we do on these bigger commercial projects, a lot of the garden is actually on top of structure. They're basically roof gardens. And our desire is always to try to make it look like it's not on a roof garden, that it's actually a garden on the grade. And you'll see, like, these sea grapes that were there, those were historic sea grapes. And they wanted to tear them out, and I fought to keep the sea grapes. And fortunately, the city was behind me, and pretty much working together, we were able to keep them. But looking across the landscape, that whole landscape there, like this rendering we did earlier, that's all on top of a structure. There's a parking garage underneath there. And now there's a Damien Hirst golden mammoth, which has become quite the Instagram moment down in Miami Beach. And another place where people get married a lot is right there by the boardwalk. We did 4 blocks of beach walk because Fina had its own district. We were able to change the pavement patterns but use the same material that they use in the rest of Miami Beach. So we did all these little mini parklets. There used to be a boardwalk that was built in the late 70s, but there was no funding to rebuild it, and the state didn't want it anymore because they felt it was a liability in hurricanes, that it might be able to be lifted by, you know, storm waves, storm surges, and thrown. So now everything's like bricks on grade. So if the worst that had happened is the bricks would wash away and then they build them back again. But you can see how it was really lopsided. There was nothing tall on the right side as you're looking here. And we brought the sables in. We took the bigger sea grapes and we trimmed them up into trees so that you could see underneath the canopy to the horizon line, whereas they were cutting them all down to a 5 or 6 foot height to open the view. Yes, the ones that are butchered, you want to do that too, but sea grapes are beautiful trees to look through. And I think that's one of the things we can do at Phipps Park is to use the bigger sea grapes as beautiful shade destinations with a great view to the sea. One of the many little parklets. We use sable palms a lot of times. Oh, sable, they're so boring, they're cheap trees, why do you use them? Well, because you know, you can get these trees from the ranch lands that have this interesting character, and you plant it look like they've always been there, and they cost like $600 to $900 a piece to plant. So you can really get a lot of mileage from it. Then you've got the seeds there, the birds eat them, and they start springing up everywhere. It's our state tree. So this is an initial site plan of the Fina house. Some of the renderings, and then some before and afters. Once again, on these big projects, you have to fight for any kind of land to be able to plant something in to begin with. Now, all my gardens have a strong foundation of native plants. They're not 100% native usually, because I also like other plants. But if there's the will for a 100% native garden, I'm all for it, because that's the rarity and that's the real beauty, the purity of being able to do that. There's so many great plants from Cuba, for instance, like native palms from there. We have 13 native species of palms. They have 30. So, you know, the one thing that I do is like never allow invasive exotic species on our property, and always plant plants that can live. If, like, I remember back when they used to not let you irrigate down here or wash your car. There were times when there was real droughts here. I've been here before where rainy season didn't start. After Hurricane Andrew, I was doing the whole redo of Ocean Reef Club, and we were dying for rain. You know, rain usually starts in May. It didn't rain till July. So there are times, and if water's short and we need drinking water, you're not going to be able to irrigate your lawn. You're not going to be able to wash your car. So I don't want to plant gardens that can die someday because they're on life support if someone decides to restrict the use of water. So a lot of the projects we do in the islands, we use irrigation just temporarily to get the plants established, because all plants need irrigation to transition from a nursery to the real world, and then discard the irrigation or use it only in severe drought periods. But another thing that really is a unifying element of our designs is we try to create gardens that look like they've always been there from day one, you know. So we'll put the money in the trees and the things that take a long time to get, to create that scale and to create the human relationship and shade and things, and space the ground covers and everything else out the way it should be, because it grows in like crazy down here. And then that's the way you can, you can stretch a budget. But the way we like to plant is that it's like you almost don't know that someone actually did the design. It was just sort of there. And that's it's effortless maintenance. Well, not completely, but if you're like me, I like to go out and prune brown palm fronds. I like to sculpt a tree and take the branches out that are going to atrophy anyway. You can read a tree and see what you need to prune and what you. I don't like the idea of blowers, and I don't like the idea of mechanical shears and having labor forces that don't know a thing about plants, that they're there and they make a lot of noise and they cut things into boxes so that you'll pay them because you know they've been there. And we call those guys mow and blow crews. Whereas you could probably do it with a lot less maintenance and have people enjoy it. I'd love to see a lot more gardeners out in the landscape industry. There's a few of them that I know, but it's there are other places where gardening it's really it's a great art form, and people share their passion for it. And I'd like to see more of that rather than just landscaping, plant combinations put together. So I love working at botanical gardens. We've done some nice work for Fairchild and Miami Beach Botanical Garden and Naples in particular. We were involved in the master planning at the very beginning with the folks they called the Green Team. The Dream Team. Could have been the Green Team. But so I was originally supposed to do the Florida garden, and that's this plan right here. And the Florida garden, because I knew more than the others about the native Florida plants, but I had this Burley Marx mural that I wanted to donate, and I was going to put it in whatever garden that I did. So Ted Flato of Lake Flato, when he saw my presentation, he said, well, Raymond should do the Brazilian garden, because that was right next to the visitors center. And then the mural could then be seen from the visitors center, from what they called the prow of the building. And since I'd been to Brazil a lot more than anybody else, I knew more Brazilian plants than anybody else. But I tell you, I had to use only Brazilian plants, so it took an awful lot of study. And thank goodness, one of my favorite things to do is study plants. So we worked on the design, and we'd have these renderings done, and they'd be used for fundraising. But the whole idea there was the Florida garden. So we did the Brazilian garden, then we did the visitor center, and then we did the Florida garden when there was a new donor who wanted to redo the Florida garden because it was the least visited garden and it's the farthest away. So it was a small space, and it was surrounded by oak trees and sable palms. They were all about the same size, and they're all straight up and down. And there were wildflowers in the middle. It was a little bit boring. And all around this garden, what you had are these incredible lakes and natural systems of natural preserves. So what we did was we changed the landform, and then we created these long vistas out into the rest of the garden. So we basically increased the scale of the Florida garden 100-fold So you see real Florida landscapes. And they didn't want me to use only Florida plants. So they wanted what they call Florida-friendly plants, which would be plants that other people can use in their landscape down here that wouldn't disrupt the ecosystems and can live in the subtropical environment we have. 6 months of rainy season, 6 months of drought or dry. The only time we get moisture pretty much from now on till rainy season starts is when the fronts come through. And I always call it free water, and I'm always really happy when it rains and other people complain about rain. So we created this high point in the Florida garden so that everything's accessible by wheelchair, and both there and the Brazilian garden, where we gained over 15 feet of height, which is one of the interesting things when I talk to people about the idea of high ground. Like, my office is at 17 feet above sea level, and when I lecture I say, we're on high ground, we're 17 feet above sea level. Everybody just sort of laughs, because they see sea level rise coming my way, but it'll be a while before it gets to 17 feet, we certainly hope. So what we did was we just created this water system surrounded by native plants and wildflowers and spider lilies. And we recirculate the water from the lake, and it runs down a slope through this beautiful little stream, creates wonderful sound. And the visitorship in this garden has gone way up. And so more people are coming to this garden, and they're going back off to the bird watching tower. This garden was built just before Irma. So we finished it in 2017, which is when I did our studio garden too. And Naples got clobbered by Irma. But the staff at the Naples Botanical Gardens, they're just fantastic. They self-performed this project using subcontractors for the waterfalls and moving of the big trees. But they had this place looking shipshape in 6 months. It was amazing. Now it looks like it's always been there. And so these were the views that we created off from the garden. And the sable palms that you see over there, we brought some taller ones in. We mixed them all along the trail that goes around the lake to create pockets of shade. So we reuse them so that, and then we sort of expanded the Florida garden. This is a residential project in Coconut Grove that's on the ridge. There's a ridge that runs through Coconut Grove. It's 20 feet above sea level. That's where all the original settlers were. Commodore Monroe was one of the most famous ones. The Barnacle, his place, is a state park that's open to the public. And we sit on oolitic limestone, that's keystone you see around here, which is from Monroe County. In Dade County, it's oolitic limestone. You come up in this area, it starts to turn into coquina as you go a little farther, and there's a lot of sand right here. In Dade County, if you scrape away the top 4 to 6 inches of organic matter, you hit bedrock of oolitic limestone, and it just goes down as far as, till the water, way below the water table. So on this project, we had to dig a big basement, so we dug all these big blocks of stone, and we used them to create landforms, so there's destination points in the garden. My client, after this project was finished, had Carlos Vives, who's a very famous Colombian musician, sing from up on top of that platform you see, and we're all dancing down below. And then oddly enough, the last piece of the property that we did, because they just kept buying properties adjacent to the one house, and then eventually they created these 6 big lots together, and then they bought a waterfront lot. But on the lowest part, which was the last part we developed, that was where we had to create the most drama because it was a focal point from all the areas up above. So we created like a 30-foot oolitic limestone bluff that you can actually jump off the top and dive. They don't let me do that anymore. But so you see we created the filtration, and the pumps are inside that block of stone that you see. And now that it's grown in, bay cedar is one of my favorite native plants. You see it in the foreground here with the agave attenuata, the spineless agave. I just love the texture and the color. We play with greens a lot in our gardens. But there's 5 different waterfalls there that create, as you move around the space, you hear the water, sound of water fades, and then it builds again. And there's my guy Dave, who helped me build all these crazy structures. before and after of that same shot. Now Dave used to be the foreman for the landscape company that did a lot of my work, but now he's our field operations guy, and he's pretty much only on our projects, and usually in the Caribbean, but he's been grounded since March. And so that's one of the other things that we believe in. We like to use the local materials wherever we're working. You know, whatever the stone is, where in the country that we're working in, or the locale. You know, who are the best masons? You know, what plants thrive there? What are the natural plant communities that you see there? And here you can see they wanted a waterfront access, so they bought this land, and there was these monster houses like 7 feet away from their property line. But we're able to completely mask them with our vegetation. Coconut palms, you know, it's a very versatile plant. I mean, you can eat it, you can drink the water, you can make oil from it. But, you know, and they've been around for, no one really knows how long they've been here, but they know that they're not originally from here. They're from the Indian Ocean region, but they've naturalized throughout. They're now on the invasive species list in Monroe County. And the city of Miami Beach won't allow you to plant coconuts in the public right-of-ways anymore in the streetscapes, which used to be the required tree in some streets. You had to plant coconut palms because that was unifying the streets. So things are changing as we speak. Royal poincianas, I love them, but you have to control them. They're on the invasive species list in Monroe County. So in areas where you have pristine natural areas, you're going to find a more strict invasive species list. Even sapodilla trees are on the invasive species list in Monroe County. Another project in Coconut Grove, also on the ridge. Great 2.5 acre site. We relocated the entrance to the site so you'd have the longest possible sight line when you came through the gate. Also found these great oak trees and said that's where the entrance should be. And we dropped the fence back so there's room off of the street. I think that's another great civic gesture. Instead of putting everything right on your property line, let some of your garden come beyond the property line. And this is actually the first project where I started doing a lot of this carving of the land and creating, it was all an avocado and mangrove orchard when we started. And that used to be where they actually harvested the stone for the house on this site. They brought a saw from Italy, and they brought some. This house, the main house, was built in the 20s, and that was actually the floor of the swimming pool. So we had to build that retaining wall of these stones to hold back the soil that had been excavated, the area that had been excavated. And because of the elevation change there, we were able to create these beautiful water features that, you know, 1 horsepower pump. We ran this whole system. And just create this beautiful sound. And then, of course, if you have oolitic limestone and you expose it to air and you have moisture on it, plants will grow on it because that's what the plants are used to growing on. So you'll get the maidenhair ferns, and all the native ferns will just start growing on their own because you've created the right environment for them. And so what's the largest piece of oolite you can move with a piece of equipment? Well, depends on your piece of, not a crane, but let's just say a track hoe or a backhoe and that sort of thing. We moved pieces that were 16 feet long by 4 feet by 4 feet. But we wanted bigger than that, so we basically just carved everything out around them and created these islands of these big blocks of oolite for sculptural reasons. And then we created this water feature that was intended to start as a cypress slough and work through the project with little cascades, sort of like we did at the Florida Garden in Naples, where the water works down to little holding ponds and eventually ends up in the larger pond you see on the left, which is groundwater. On the right, on the left, the area that looks like it might have been built by a farmer just to hold water for his crops. That's all made with concrete, but it's been covered with oolite, so it looks natural. The pond on this image. This one is it's on Fort Lauderdale, 600 feet of water. There was a 20-foot ficus benjamina hedge around the whole property, and I was able to convince the client to let me plant natives as a privacy buffer. And he only let me do one little section first to prove that I can get him the privacy he had before. But we were able to prove that, and now, you know, the neighborhood has this wildlife preserve right in the middle of, close to downtown Miami in the Las Olas area. I was hired because he knew another one of my clients down, who had a property in Florida Keys that he saw that he loved. It was mostly all natives. And he was working with somebody, and he asked the landscape architect, this was after the 2005 hurricane season when we got like a bunch of hurricanes. He said, what's on this plan? And nothing had been planted yet. He says, what's on this plan that could have taken, you know, the site being covered with salt water? And according to my client, the guy said, really not much. And he had seen the project I did in the Florida Keys that had been through hurricanes and pretty much was unscathed by the saltwater intrusion, at least. Because, listen, people talk about sea level rise. We get sea level rise every time there's a hurricane. You know, we're used to that. We're used to storm surges. We're used to lowlands being covered with salt water for a little while. The plants that grew naturally in those areas, they can take it. That's what they're made for. And then there's not many more. How y'all doing out there? Are you enjoying this? Okay, great. This is a project up a little bit north from here. It actually has a piece of land that's 50 feet above sea level. And we were able to take a landscape that was, you know, had some scattered native trees and then make that the feature of the site. So along this stretch of the road, which is probably about 1,000 feet long, it was all Brazilian pepper, and that they would just cut back from the road. And it was this sterile, like massive invasive species. And we were able to get rid of it all and move some of the native larger trees and then plant all the rest of the natives on both sides of the road. And we get a lot of compliments from people, and hopefully we'll see a lot more of that. I can see something like this along, you know, Phipps Park, you know, along A1A on both sides to create this incredible natural habitat. So some of these images we could be looking at basically at Phipps Park. Nature trails that are all ADA accessible, but aren't just a ramp that makes you zigzag to get up, but pleasant way to get from to gain elevation and enjoy nature. And to see more birds and to see more butterflies and dragonflies. And this is a project that we did down in the Florida Keys just before Irma. My client's son got married there, and then Irma hit it, and then we took another 9 months rebuilding it. But if you see it now, you'd never know that anything had happened to it. But it was just sort of this, everything was just marl and a few scattered trees, you know, planted in rows. So we did a lot of earth sculpting here to create wetlands, which are very inexpensive to plant, because you just plant wetlands, grasses, and wildflowers, and you can really stretch $1 and put the money into the specimen trees. And there was this pond there that was part of a shrimp farming operation that's on the land adjacent. They used to own all this land, the shrimp farm. So we actually were able to enlarge the pond to harvest Florida keystone, to sell it, to get the keystone that we wanted for free for our property. And in fact, then they brought down oolite that we needed for retaining. So it was sort of we made the pond bigger, which was better for us and better for the habitat. And then we also, it's like strip, I don't want to say strip mining, but it was like mining, quarrying, that's the word I'm looking for. And so we always use that to create, you know, you bring water into a garden, and then it just magnifies your universe. You see the clouds twice. You see the reflections of the plants. It creates a connection with the universe. And then, because this is stocked with saltwater fish, native fish now, we created this walkway across it with these blocks of oolite, because we recirculate the water, and then it was supposed to fill on the left and then spill between these walkways, but we found out that the groundwater moves so much there that it didn't really matter, so the water's the same level on both sides. On the right, there's a great red mangrove forest. And there you can see us, the stone we we got. You know, we had to build the land way up there. The finished floor of the house is at 15 feet above sea level, which was really good for Irma. But the low points on the site are still, where we have the wetlands, are still 3 feet above sea level. So we had to create grade change that felt like a natural landform. So the road's long and it winds. So you get up to that high area where you don't feel like you're in a stilt house. And then, of course, if you have that much land, it's nice to have your own beach. And using the oolite for, you know, retention, so you're able to marry landscape architecture with architecture and make the architect's vision of going underneath parts of his building a reality. And this is the last one, but not the least one. So, we do a lot of work in the Bahamas. Over at Baker's Bay, we've done a bunch of projects that they were looking really good. We just finished 2 before the monster storm, and we're rebuilding them now. But just to show you a garden that a very sandy, very windy, very salty place, we created this garden here out of just a blank lot. And there's there's leeward gardens that are protected from the salt spray. Courtyards, we actually brought this stone in from the Dominican Republic because it was less expensive than the Keystone. It's their limestone. And then created a beach that's all full of native beach plants, the sea lavender, golden creeper, the beach grasses, spider lily. And my client's an avid kite sailor. So I mean, his favorite thing is just be right off of his property sailing, and then his family hanging out in the pool gets to watch him go by. If you plant the right plant in the right place, it'll grow effortlessly and get to one of the main things that we try to do is use plants, put them in the right place so they can grow to their maximum growth potential. What does their genetic makeup tell them they want to be? You know, if you want a plant that's going to be 3 feet tall, instead of planting a plant that wants to be 20 feet tall and keep cutting it to 3 feet, then you find a plant that wants to be 3 feet tall and you plant it and let it grow, and then you don't have to prune it. It's just common sense landscaping. The old battle between I want to keep the view open, I don't want anything in my view to block the water view. You know, we always convince people or try, and then usually we win, that the water views can be a lot nicer if you have these other beautiful foreground elements and you can basically highlight certain views. So I lied. There's one. Anyway, I could probably go on all night. I don't remember how many is in here, but I'll just go really quick. We do these architecture, all the pools and things you see, we've done those. This was a little suburban house in Miami Beach. It has a circular driveway around the front. And so we found these, we could extend a trellis 4 feet into the right of way, and we could do a water garden in the front setback and sort of things like that. So we took this place from being like a place for cars into a place for people. And we actually worked on the house to create this interior-exterior integration, which is another thing that's a really big thing in our gardens, to try to blur the boundaries between your property and the next property, to blur the boundaries between the inside and the outside, and to, you know, bring nature back into the city. Simpson stoppers are just magnificent little courtyard trees. And they have a great fragrance, beautiful trunks. The only problem you might have, every now and then the raccoons will climb them to eat the fruit, and they might break a branch or two. But here, you know, I had like 8 feet between our property and the neighbor's property. I made the pool a little bit smaller, the existing pool, but I was able to get that edge of the woods look in that very short period of time and create, and that's another thing we try to do, is like not allow any off-site views to other man-made built things, unless of course it's a beautiful church tower or a steeple or something that's really worthy to look at, a beautiful bridge. But usually we try to create, you know, our own little volume of space where you can commune with nature. And Miami Beach Botanical Gardens, the native plants were in a back corner. They said, you want to see native plants? They're in the back corner over there. And my concept was like, it's too small to be a true botanical garden, but it's a great green urban space. So we brought natives out and put them throughout the whole garden and changed the whole circulation, created a water garden. I guess some might say I'm formulaic because I use water a lot in my gardens. Well, it took years of me fighting to be able to get water gardens in my gardens, I have to tell you that. But I don't think I've ever done one for someone who wasn't grateful that they had one. It really can enrich your life. Oh, so this is up in Jupiter, but you know, and this is actually has a liner because it's really up above. But the magical place, you create a little nook like this in a piece of property, and you can go out there and watch the birds and just look at the sky and feel at peace and feel connected with nature. And I think, like, you know, I don't know if humans were ever, I mean, of course we were, but intended to live in skyscrapers and in big cities where everything's like concrete and asphalt and everything. But, you know, I think that humans want to be closer to nature. They just, a lot of them just don't know how, you know. And there aren't a lot of opportunities. Like Central Park, what a great opportunity, right? Frederick Law Olmsted, you know, he was a farmer till he was 40. He was just a great intellect. He helped start the Red Cross in the Civil War. I mean, if you ever get a chance to read any books about him. But, you know, you're in this dense city of New York, which I love New York, you know, but then you go in the city and you're in another world. And it's not native landscaping, it's not natural. They did all that sculpting of the earth to create, it was bogs and things, to create those rock formations you see. Those were underground. He exposed those. He created the elevation change and the topography and everything. He planted all the great trees you see there. But with time, it looks like it's always been there. I imagine it looked great when it was first done as well. But it was another great inspiration to me as Central Park. So now we have Phipps Park. And I'm really looking forward to doing some wonderful things there with native plants and creating a great place for you all to go and enjoy, all your family and your friends. And it's an honor to be here, and thank you very much. And I'll be back.